The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're going to love it.
Okay, let's go.
So anyway, I prepped the audience yesterday on you. And the thing I told them was that in addition to your knowledge base on this topic of Russia and Ukraine, what I like the most is that you are a white American lady. And I told everybody, I mean that in a unbelievably respectful way, but it also is important because, as you and I have talked, a lot of times when it comes to whether it's Ukraine, Russia, Gaza, Israel, Palestine, Israel, whatever the case may be, when an audience thinks a person has skin in the game, and in this case, let's say you had, Russian or Ukrainian heritage or something like that, then it tends to bias. But since you don't, I'm excited. All right, everybody, I talked to you guys about this yesterday, but Christine Lynn is here, and we are going to have an awesome discussion about the Russia-Ukraine situation. So let me set the stage a little and read everybody your impressive bio, and then we'll kind of go from there. But Christine is a historian, geopolitical analyst, and expert on Russia. Her articles have been published in magazines and newspapers for over 30 years, and she's authored 4 books. She's appeared as a guest on numerous talk shows, radio, TV, and podcasts, and we are glad to have her today on the Deep Shallow Dive. For decades, she's been a vocal opponent of what she considers American and NATO aggression, and says that as a historian, she understood and believed from the start that Russia's 2022 special military operation was the righteous action it had to take, and not, as President Biden and every other media outlet said, Putin's brutal invasion. All right, Christine, welcome.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be with you, Ray. Very happy to be here. Let's shed some light on all that lying propaganda that the Americans have been subjected to from their government and media. And it's gone on against Russia, this Russophobia, for decades. And so I'm very happy to be here and join you and your audience.
Well, I appreciate it. All right, so let's do this, because what we really try to do here, or what I really try to do is, break things down, and we're going to go deep, but we're going to stay shallow and we'll dive in. Where do you want to start? Should we start at the end of the Cold War in terms of like 1990, 91, or do you want to start a little bit later? Where do you think a good is to start to explain what's going on?
Well, I think I would like to share with your audience first what is most recent in regards to the SMO, as to why the Russian Federation did this. And I think we can easily work back, because behind that, it does go back for decades, Cold War and prior to the Cold War, actually, in terms of this falsified narrative that Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, was a threat to the United States. But I'd like to talk about the SMO, since it's on everybody's mind right now with the negotiations as they are, and let's work our way back.
Okay, let's do that. And when you say SMO, you mean Special Military Operation. So, okay, let's do that. Let's start with today. It sounds like Zelensky now has kind of his back up against the wall. Him and Biden seem to be buddy, and it doesn't look like him and Trump are that. So tell us what you think, I guess, is going to happen next.
Well, in terms of what's going to happen next, I'm going to first emphasize, since the media and our government, the U.S. government, has repeatedly called it a brutal invasion, and it makes me laugh. Sadly, it's a tragedy to have all of this loss of life. But yeah, I think in terms of right now, in terms of Trump, the Trump administration, it's most certainly better. How crazy was it for the Biden administration to have no contact with a superpower such as the Russian Federation? But in terms of what happened in Ukraine, this has been escalating and necessitating Putin to do something about it for decades. And I would like to tell your audience what the necessity of that, and I call it a righteous action, because number one, there were thousands of persons in the Donbass, which is part of Ukraine, that were being persecuted were being murdered, being raped, the atrocities that were going on for 8 years as they asked the Russian Federation for help. The Ukrainian government, ever since the coup, which you and I will get into later, in the USA-backed coup in 2014, the people there are Russian speakers. They're essentially Russian. They are members of the Russian Orthodox Church or the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which has been tragically replaced by what I call the CIA Church now by the United States. But they were persecuted for speaking Russian. They were not permitted to speak Russian. Their textbooks for their children actually taught the children that the Ukraine was never a part of the Soviet Union, never mentioned that it was a part of it. But the atrocities and the constant shelling, and it's what is happening now, even today, as we speak, Ray, the Ukrainians commit atrocities. They shell the civilian towns, the supermarkets, the grocery stores, the hospitals. They're even sending their drones against civilian cars at this time. And it was time for the Russian Federation to come in, recognize them, accept their ascension, and defend them. Because as it was for 8 years, thousands of people were murdered and there were rape rooms. It's disgusting. And we're finding even now in the Kursk region more such atrocities. That was what life was like for so many of these Russian-speaking Ukrainians. So that was part of the reason Putin started the special military operation. And number two, which I think we'll elaborate upon, is the NATO expansion. I remember in 2007, President Putin at the Munich Security Conference had said, "What is this about? Who is this against?" Because it continued to expand despite the lies, and they were lies, because we know for a fact from the National Security Archives that even going back as far as George H.W. Bush, that at the time when Baker was negotiating with Gorbachev, at the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were multiple times that they were promised no NATO expansion. Putin himself has said, and he's a very patient man, I must say, when you call this the only thing brutal has been what the Ukrainians have done to the people in those 4 regions. The Russian Federation needed to step in for those people's sake. And they also needed to step in to defend the Russian Federation, because the number one goal of the United States for decades, stated goal in all of their documents, is the strategic defeat of Russia. And it came a time where he had to put a stop to it.
Okay. All right. That's a lot. All right. Let me ask you a couple things. One is, do you have any idea in terms of the death toll? How many Ukrainians have lost their lives since 2022? I
would first of all say, don't listen to Trump. He appears to get his information from the Ukrainians or his people around him, which is a joke, all of the lies that they have said. I'm not going to speculate. I do actually, since the beginning, follow the, battleground and the deaths. But I would estimate that the Ukrainian loss is probably anywhere from 5 to 7 times the loss of the Russian Federation soldiers. But I've read various numbers. I'm not going to attempt to estimate, but I could say there's
no. But I mean, are we talking like 100,000 Ukrainians,
no,
500,000?
Far more. I mean, I would probably say somewhere around 700,000, 800,000, and perhaps.
Wow.
And I feel that is a conservative estimate. And that's a tragedy. This did not have to happen. This is all because
that's an unbelievable tragedy. And those are the numbers I've heard. I've heard north of 700,000 Ukrainians have died since 2022. That is an insane number. Okay, let's talk about this. You mentioned the 8 years since, basically, I'm assuming 2014. Why don't you explain to us, because I've talked about this several times, but it would be good to hear your perspective. The Viktor Yanukovych situation in 2014, where, I'll set the stage, he was democratically elected. And from what I've gathered, he basically wanted to, kind of be neutral. He wanted to not necessarily be fully aligned with the Russians, not necessarily be fully aligned with NATO, turn the Americans. And from my research, that seemed like the U.S. got to a point where they're like, yeah, you know what? No. And so they backed, I believe it's called the Maidan something, but they overthrew him. That's how I understand it. Am I missing anything?
No, that's it even began before then in terms of Yanukovych and the elections prior to that and the Orange Revolution. But yes, we're going to start right there. What is the most recent history? He was the duly elected president of Ukraine, and the United States was very unhappy with that. NATO was very unhappy with that because it was neutrality. There are those who claim, oh, he was pro-Russian. I don't see it that way, and I really took a look at his policies. And when it served him to do transactions with the Russian Federation, he did so. When it was with the EU, he did so. But they cannot accept the sovereign decisions of such a country. They only want vassals. And what you were speaking of is the Maidan coup. And that is when it came to a head in 2014. And it was a tragic event. And the key for people to understand, this was a U.S.-backed coup. The subsequent leader, and then thereafter the election and Zelensky, was planned. And we have actually the phone calls, the notorious phone call of Victoria Nuland prior to 2014, discussing who the United States wanted to come in and be the next president. Now, again, this is before the coup. And of course, your audience should understand that billions of dollars had been put into Ukraine, and also training the people who were going to be there. On that particular day, bloody Maidan coup, there were snipers that were placed. And the Western narrative was that these snipers were, killing the police and killing But what it turned out to be is these were Western trained snipers. I think some of them were trained in Poland, and they shot both the police and the demonstrators. This was not a natural, organic revolution by any means. This was a planned coup by the United States, bussing in those who would do the protest. And they blamed all the deaths that day. And it was, they set fire to the building. People actually died in the fire, as well as the snipers. But the snipers were there to shoot both sides and blame it all upon Yanukovych's government. And of course, to me, it's just a clear example to me, in my opinion. The CIA deposed him. Much money went into this. Billions of dollars had already gone into Ukraine preparing for this because it was always going to be the proxy to be used against Russia. But the civilians died. It was horrible. And they blamed it and said as if this was the people. And of course, that's the way the United States operates. All over the world, they have orchestrated such coups. And for me, everything thereafter is illegitimate. The president that they put in, the subsequent election, because everything then was taken over by the United States and the UK.
Okay. And so that's the Maidan coup that took place in 2014. It got rid of Viktor Yanukovych, and then was that guy Petro Poroshenko? Was that the guy that then took power?
There was an interim one prior to that, the one Nuland had spoken about, and then they moved to him, and then to Zelensky, who ran, by the way. Zelensky ran on a peace platform. Everyone knows about the comedian, quote, comedian, if you want to call it that, his antics on stage and the type of performances, but that was his career. But he ran on a peace platform that he was going to make peace with the parts of Ukraine where there was the fighting and all of that going on. And to me, the sad thing about it is we can focus upon Biden, who made this horrible, but all of our U.S. presidents have been complicit in this. Okay. It's just very sad to see everybody added to it. And I'm very glad to see there's dialogue now, but everyone contributed to the tragedy that is now being experienced.
Okay. You know what? That's a great point. And I think that's a point that, quite frankly, probably applies to so many global regime changes, global coups, foreign policy situations. We're in such a divided place right now where it's, right versus left. Either you have Trump derangement syndrome or you have Trump worship syndrome. And I'm always trying to be right in the middle where we call a spade on everything. Let me ask you about Zelensky because you brought him up. So that guy, again, from my research, he kind of came out of nowhere. His background was that of a comedian, an actor, a performance person. somewhat similar to Justin Trudeau and Emmanuel Macron from what I've learned. But like, was he just placed into that? Like, how did he even all of a sudden become, the president of Ukraine?
Well, I would suspect, of course, in terms of the funding and what was going on in the country, that the collective West would have been a part of that. They know who they want and they make sure that it happens. But other than that, like I said, he did become very popular because people did want peace. They did not want this fighting and the death that was happening at that time. And again, that was 8 years of that. So people did want to change. So I think he did get popular support because he ran on the platform. And of course, once he obtained the power, it's just the opposite. He's going to listen to his controllers, which is the U.S. and the U.K. And yes, talking about coups and all of this, when you think about it, and I've read so many of the documents in the National Security Archive, which is a great resource for people, especially what came out since 2017, going back into the Cold War, as you and I were discussing. And you just see the NATO, the United States, the UK. In fact, I would say that the United States and the UK is the greatest threat to peace. And it's the greatest threat to the United States, not because they want to threaten, but because they do seek peace. And the United States and the UK see that as a weakness. And going back to how we began this, when the special military operation was begun, they have always accused Russia of the very thing they did. Who has 800 to 1,000 military bases around the world? The United States. Who lied to Russia and continued with billions of dollars to turn all of the former Warsaw Pact countries against Russia? The United States. All of that is aggression. I haven't seen any aggression on the Russian Federation's part, but only, and now they have accomplished what they wanted. But now they're losing, and they didn't bargain on that. But it was inevitable, frankly. I would say that when we were talking about the battlefield, anyone who has studied it, you knew from the start, of course, the Russian Federation is going to prevail. But they're doing it in a war of attrition. They're doing it carefully. They want to minimize life and accomplish their purpose and demilitarize. But at the same time, I would have to say they've done it in a very humane way. It's probably the most humane action, unlike what we see in NATO, what they did to Yugoslavia and Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a very different approach. It's the collective West that is causing all of this worldwide.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I hear you. And obviously, these are difficult things for, us Americans to hear. And it's like, wait a minute, what? We're the bad guys? Or even if you don't want to say good guys or bad guys, we're the ones causing the problem. Let's talk about NATO for a minute, because, again, this is another topic that, the average American just doesn't even really understand what NATO is. What is it? Why are we in it? And fundamentally, give us your thoughts on the creation of NATO and then the Warsaw Pact. And then really, why does NATO even still exist when the Warsaw Pact doesn't exist?
Yeah, perfect. And if only Gorbachev had been strong enough and said both of them should be disbanded. First of all, NATO should not exist right now. It is not a defensive pact. It is, I would just say, a U.S. tool of aggression worldwide. U.S. and U.K. That is all that it exists for. As I was talking about the military bases, it is how they want to maintain American hegemony. And for me, I do look at it as, I know it's difficult for as an American to consider that your country is responsible for all of this death, but they are responsible for bloodshed all over the world. You take a look at, and we won't get into it on this show, but take a look at what's happening in Gaza. None of this, I always think about Yugoslavia, now Serbia. It's horrific, the number of deaths that have happened worldwide because of U.S. aggression. But the key to it, Ray, is that they use the media in order to put their spin on it and their narrative. So we have generations of Americans who have grown up thinking, as you said, we're the good guy, but we're not. And I'm a Christian. I believe in looking at what is right and wrong, what is good and evil. And I view, sadly, I have to say that my own country is responsible for most of the evil, the military conflicts in the world. They are always the instigator, one way or another, they or the UK. And it's really difficult because you love your country, you love your people, you want to believe, but it's lying propaganda when you start to look at history.
Yeah, totally. And, I always say, we all love our country, and it's not our country, and it's not even the government. It's certain people inside the government. I think it would blow people's mind at potentially how small, I don't know if it's 100 people, 1,000 people or whatever, but fundamentally, again, it's not me and my neighbor doing covert regime change across the world. It's the people in charge of government. And you made a great point earlier. It really has ping-ponged back and forth between Republicans to Democrats. You look at, Reagan to Clinton. Reagan, I thought, was good. Let's start with George H. Bush, Papa Bush, and then Clinton, and then George W. Bush, who was awful, and then Obama, and then Obama to Trump, and even Trump's, first term. I don't think he really accomplished all that much in his first term, but that ping pong ball of, quite frankly, aggression and corruption always seemed to bounce back and forth between Democrats and Republicans. The question becomes, is Trump the guy that says, hey, okay, I'm going to break up this uniparty and we're not going to do this anymore? What are your thoughts on that? Where do you net out on Trump right now?
First of all, I would say I put a very big distinction between domestically what he's doing and his international policy, both first term and now. I always go back to during his first term, his speech at the UN, where he talked about every nation of the world should be focusing, just like he focused on Make America Great Again, focused on your own country, that every country should do that. But what he neglected to do as president then, and what he's neglecting to do now, although it does seem to be getting better, was to have that respect for the sovereignty of other nations. Sadly, during his first term, he was the first one since Obama and Lynn and the coup. Trump was the first one to supply a considerable number of lethal weapons to Ukraine. That's why I said earlier, it's not a matter of Democrats and Republicans. All of them agree upon American hegemony. And I reject that. I believe that there can be cooperation in sciences and education, and there can be cooperation and there can be healthy competition. But when you come in as a bully to accomplish and say, I have to be the superpower, I have to be the unipower of the world, and all of our presidents have agreed to that. Right now, I do like the progress that I see that at least Trump and his team are talking with the Russians. I see that there's probably going to be some, let's say, much better for all of us as Americans in terms of economically, socially, travel, all of this between Americans and Russia as it used to be. All of that should be restored. Look, we don't even have Russian consulates. It's very difficult for people, who have family and want to travel. All of that is going to get better. And there's so much potential if you get rid of this American hegemonic goal. But Trump hasn't done that. I think that when Trump says he wants peace, he wants to distance himself and get this Ukraine project over with. It didn't go as planned for the United States at this time. I don't believe he has fundamentally rejected the goal of the strategic defeat of Russia, because if he did, Ray, all that he would have to do right now is to end all of the weaponry, all of the intelligence, stop the Starlink, stop all the personnel that are there, and also stop the selling of weapons to those countries who are declaring that they are going to take it right into Ukraine. If he really wanted to stop the bloodshed, he can just stop all of that. He hasn't done that. He's a negotiator, and I've read all of his books. I read them years ago. I've always admired that about him. But when it comes to international relations, I believe that we should have respect and sovereignty. He's not, respect for the sovereignty of other nations. He's not coming from that perspective, but nevertheless, he knows it's in his best interest, in America's best interest, to be rid of this Ukraine project. So I see hope. It's just it could be ended quickly if the saving of human lives were his goal.
Okay, gotcha. I like when you call it the Ukraine project, because it does seem like it's a project that they tried to implement. One thing that I talked about in a previous episode was, I said, if you buy into this military industrial complex theory and all that, which I really have to give Robert F. Kennedy Jr. credit for getting that into the mainstream, getting that into the forefront, even though the military industrial complex was announced by Dwight D. Eisenhower before John F. Kennedy took the presidency. So it's been around a long time, but we've never really thought about it and thought about what it does. And then RFK Jr. really the past, let's say 2 years, has brought that into the forefront. When I saw and when I started researching this and when I started understanding it, the other thing I thought about this Ukraine project, and I'll call it that, is it seemed like it came right after we withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021, which to me was a 20-year forever war that was the tent pole of the military-industrial complex. Mm-hmm. And so the question I have is, was part of this Ukraine project a replacement for Afghanistan? Was Ukraine, Afghanistan 2.0, the new Afghanistan and the new way to funnel money into the military-industrial complex? Do you think that played into this as well?
That's a very interesting point, Ray. I mean, I think that would be part of it. But the Ukraine project goes back so far before then that I think that they were just trying to provoke Russia. So had it occurred in 2022 or had it occurred in 2018 or 2016, and as the president of Russia has said, he regrets that he didn't do this because it would have saved lives, because all of this time the collective West was bringing weapons in, training them. They were preparing. So the goal at all times. So yeah, I think it was convenient for them. They like those distractions, of course. And all of this, as you rightly stated, is all about money. And even the goal of Russia, which we don't have to go back this far, but I can tell you in my studies goes back, not only the Cold War, but even during the revolution in the Soviet Union, the goals on paper of our government has been the defeat of Russia. Powerful, the resources, the natural resources, even at the end of World War II, Churchill, what is some insane project unthinkable. He wanted to drop an atomic bomb on Russia. I mean, he was like, they're at their weak point now. Let's do it now. They didn't, fortunately. The U.S. did not agree to that. So I just think that it may be happenstance and they were prepared to go. It did make a very good distraction, which the government likes whenever they get in an embarrassing situation. That's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That all makes sense. So the numbers in terms of what the United States has contributed to the Ukraine project since 2022, I've seen 200 billion as the number, and then 150 billion from Europe. And Macron was at the White House this week with Trump. And it was so funny. They were like arguing back and forth about like, well, ours was a loan and yours was not a loan. And like the funny thing was neither one had a clear answer. So in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, how is it that you guys as the leaders don't clearly even know how much money we've given? But do you think those numbers are accurate? Is it more than that? Is it less than that?
I think it is. From my research and watching what has been done, I think it is significantly more than 200 billion. I think it is significantly more. I would put, and we're just talking about from 2022 onward. Prior to that, there were billions, hundreds of billions, frankly, that were put into Ukraine. So no, it's far more than that since then, in my opinion, which is sad. And let's get back to the best interest of the American people. The best interest of you and I and all of our audience is that there be peace, that we not be in an aggressive conflict with a nuclear power. And I would remind everybody that regardless of what you see about the U.S. military, the Russian military and the weaponry that they have developed is far greater than anything the collective West has. We don't want it to ever come to that. And Russia has been seeking peace for decades with the United States. And yet we have continued, as you and I have discussed. And we suffer. And you talked about it's the leaders. But the leaders do come from us, frankly. And that is why I appreciate being on your show and other shows, because the American people need to change their idea that if I have all that I need, I've got a job and I've got gasoline and all of this, everything's okay regardless of what my government does. No, it is essential that you know the truth about the evil that the U.S. is doing and the suffering and the misery that it is causing for a certain few, to make a lot of money. And that grift has been going on for decades. And Ukraine is a primary example. And I'm very glad to see it coming to light. But the American people are kind of a part of it too, because I don't think that most of them really care about the truth, but some do. And I think it is essential to those like yourself, Ray, as we learn the truth, to share it, and not just simply repeat the propaganda, because the hatred of Russia goes back for decades, and the U.S. has really crafted that with the American people. And it's time the American people see that that is false. Plenty of people know that, but you need to care what your country is doing. It might not be your family dying, but there are other people's families dying and suffering. And it's because our country, in our name, with our money, are murdering them, are killing them in the name of profit. And it's really the more that we are enlightened, then we can start to stop it and tell whoever are the elected that we oppose that and we're not going to elect them. But I believe it's I will say this, it's more than a political problem. There's no political solution to a spiritual problem. And I just think that the consumerism, the greed, then manifest in those who become our leaders. They just have more power and they use it for greed. It's something that the United States as a people and a society need to change in their heart before the government is going to change.
Oh, I hear you on that. I hear you on that. All right, I'm going to table that for a second because I want to talk about a few different things, but I'll get back to that. You know, I think you made some great points in terms of waking up to our political leaders. You know, there was something that came out literally, I think yesterday or the day before, that showed, you know, Nancy Pelosi, Democrat, Mitch McConnell, Republican, Chuck Schumer, Democrat, someone like Ted Cruz, Republican. And it showed that their salaries are like maybe $200,000 a year. And
Right.
They're all worth north of $60 to $400 million. And it's like, how is that possible that somebody who is a career politician, who's been in the game for, 30, 40 years, and yeah, they make 200, 250. I mean, but that's not anything. That salary does not warrant, in Mitch McConnell, Republican, Nancy Pelosi, Democrats case, that doesn't warrant a net worth of over $200 million.
No.
And so people need to wake up to that stuff that's happening. And that's why I said at the beginning of this, it's pretty insane that the group of people that are benefiting, when you put it on a percentage basis, that's the 1% of the country, less than 1%. Those are the people that are benefiting through the Lockheed Martins, Raytheons, Boeing, the defense contractors. That is really a cycle. It is really a crazy, vicious cycle. And I'm hoping we break out of that. All right, let me ask you about the Nord Stream pipeline. I've talked about that on the show before. And obviously, I think it was boom, the Nord Stream pipeline blows up. And then all of a sudden on Fox, MSNBC, CNN, quite frankly, all of them were like, oh, Russia blew up the Nord Stream, their Nord Stream pipeline.
Right.
What are your thoughts on the Nord Stream pipeline?
Well, I look at it always. We should go to what is probably the most likely. Look at who benefits. It was the United States who benefited. And although I've seen a number of different suppositions on this, I really feel that Seymour Hersh, I tend to agree with him. I would say in all likelihood, this was a CIA operation. They may very well, at that time, when I took a look at where going back to where the ships were in our Navy, doing NATO exercises there, would have had the perfect opportunity to place the explosives and then at a later time remotely detonate them. And I would remind everybody also, not only who benefits, but who said that this was going to happen. We had, I believe, Victoria Nuland saying that, if there was any action taken by Russia in regards to Ukraine, that the Nord Stream would be no more. We had Biden standing right next to Olaf Scholz. What a vassal of a country. Sad to see what's happened to Germany. But he's standing right there and saying, oh, we're going to take care of it. And I'm just paraphrasing. But he said, we're going to do something about that if that happens. And even Trump, he didn't like it. We know that. During his time, he put very heavy sanctions on Germany and really mocked them for doing this. So all of the U.S. presidents, but at the time, yes. You take a look at Biden said it was going to be no more. Nuland said it was going to be no more. It was no more. So let's take them at their word, why don't we? Because they're the ones who benefited.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. And you could take it all the way back to Condoleezza Rice. I remember Condoleezza Rice said the same thing. And again, this is what we have to get people to realize. Condoleezza Rice was part of the Bush administration, so we're talking Republicans there.
Right.
And then Victoria Nuland is somebody that I really need to deep dive on her, because she's, to me, is like a Henry Kissinger type, where she's been under the radar, involved with everybody. She jumps from Republican administration to Democrat administration to Republican administration to Democrat administration. A couple guys that I really like, Glenn Greenwald talks about her, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who I love that guy. I think that guy's super legit. He talks about her and he says, hey, these are the real, evil geniuses behind the scenes, people like Victoria Nuland. And then, old school Henry Kissinger, who I think was a total, he was the puppet master pulling the strings on things. So anyway, okay. All right. Good on that. Let's see. Let me ask you, who else do you like? Like, do you like Professor Jeffrey Sachs? Do you like John Mearsheimer?
I certainly do. Glenn Greenwald actually went to a conference where he was at one time. It was nice to meet him, many years ago. These are truth tellers. And it's very good to see that there are Americans who have the courage to speak the truth. And of course, their voices up until now have really been, the average American has not been listening, but now people are seeking them out. And that is good. I like all that you said. There's not really that many more who are. There are a few very good ones in other countries. I would really recommend to your audience, if they don't follow on Telegram, you can actually have a lot of independent journalists and talking about the conflict in Ukraine, where you can literally almost very shortly after be there on the battlefield, seeing what has happened, interviews, some of them tragic, very, very sad, but you definitely want to utilize Telegram to get the truth. And beyond those speakers that we just now mentioned, there's a lot in Ukraine itself and in Russia, but in Ukraine itself, that you can follow and learn a lot from.
Okay, interesting. I'll have to get those from you and I'll start to follow them and then I'll share them with everybody. Let me ask you this question, and I don't know if you know the answer to this. I have a few Russian friends and I always talk to them and I say, hey, do you like Putin? Do you guys like Putin? Like, do your parents like Putin? Does your uncle, your aunt who still lives in Russia, do they like Putin? It is across the board. They're like, we love Putin.
Yes.
We think he's amazing.
Yes.
And so I was just curious. Yeah. Like, is his approval rating in Russia? I've heard it's like 86%, something like that. Is that all true?
Yes, I would say it is authentic. I mean, I too know, have met persons electronically, internet, in Russia, and Americans here who are, came from Russia years ago, and they are in touch with their families. And yes, he is loved. He is appreciated. And I would say from everything that I know about him, and I've done, use your term, a very deep dive into the man. I wanted to see, is he authentic? Is he genuine? And I am convinced that he is. And that is why the people respond to him. He loves his country. He loves the Russian people, and he saved Russia. Frankly, when you speak with people who suffered right after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it was horrible in terms of their provisions, the difficulties, the struggle. And he came in and he literally saved the country then, just like he is saving it now. And they look at him in that way because he was a lawyer. He's also a very strong economist, and he knew exactly what to do. And he rid the country of a lot of the oligarchs. Those are generally going to be the people you see on those silly documentaries to tell you how bad Putin is. They're the ones who were kicked out.
Yeah.
They were the ones kicked out of the country, at least a number of them. But yes, he is loved. And I feel that his love for the Russian people has been evinced in numerous ways. And I think it's real. And definitely the people do appreciate him.
Okay, interesting. By the way, he has to know how to speak English fluently, right? Like, there's no way that dude does not speak. He never speaks English in any of his interviews, but I always laugh. I'm like, dude, come on. We know you know how to speak English.
He has spoken English on a few occasions. Yeah.
Oh, he has? Okay. I understand.
Very rare when he was putting in the pitch for Russia to host the Olympics, the Winter Olympics in Sochi, which they did, which was beautiful. He actually did to the Olympic Committee, and you can see the video. Go look it up on YouTube. You'll find spoken English. Also, he sings in English.
Oh, that's fun.
I did a charity fundraiser in which he sang on Blueberry Hill. So, yeah, in terms of when he's meeting with people, I think that often world leaders, and he speaks fluent German. And has given speeches in German, and when he's meeting with Germany in the past, which was another thing that's sad. Speaking of Germany, the Minsk agreements, and I just thought of this, the lies that were told straight to Putin's face by the Germans, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Merkel herself has admitted that we were lying to Putin, that they were going to have it back for these and make these autonomous regions and stop the killing of the civilians. That was what he saw. And it has now come out that they, at the time with Zelensky, were lying to Putin in order to arm Ukraine for what is happening right now. And it just, it occurred to me the lies that have been going on to him as a leader. And he doesn't want war. He doesn't want death. And he's tried to prevent it, but hopefully Trump will let it stop now, let it de-escalate. And I'm really glad to see the communication that's happening.
Yeah, I hope so. I've never really talked about the Minsk Accords. Can you give us just a quick 30 seconds on what those were?
Well, Minsk 1, they were getting together again for the regions that I told you about in the Donbass, Kherson, Lugansk, Donetsk. Those regions were being shelled continually. This is in Ukraine. Ukrainian government killing Ukrainian civilians. Why? Because they speak Russian, because they recognize their church, and that persecution was going on. So they wanted help, and they had appealed to Russia. And Russia's intervention in Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 was an agreement, very good agreement, that Ukraine government would stop the assaults, the attacks upon these civilians. It would just respect their autonomy, and they would remain part of Ukraine. And they never did. They continued murdering civilians for years. Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 were meant to stop what is going on right now from it escalating to this type of military confrontation.
Okay. All right. Listen, this has been amazing. I want to give you the last word and basically tell us what you think's going to happen in the next, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. Like, what's going to happen next? Is Trump going to put an end to this? What do you think's going to happen?
Well, I would hope that he would, but as I already stated, he could do that instantly, so to speak, by stopping all of the weapons and intelligence to anyone who is supplying them. Instead, he's trying to negotiate something, because I think he evaluates everything not from peace, not from human life, but by the dollar. He wants to be a win. He doesn't want to have some embarrassment on the United States. So he's trying to save face. And I think Russia's trying to help and not talk about what he had done to escalate it. I would say that it looks promising, except I don't see any kind of a plan. All of those that worked with him in the past, not right now, but they're all warmongers. They all believe in American hegemony. But I think because Putin does want to put an end to this, and Trump does for his own reasons, that, for the first time, there is hope. I surely would like to see that. At the very least, regardless of Ukraine, and Russia may have to continue and until and if, because they're not going to agree to all the terms you see floated out there. They're not going to have, quote, peacekeepers. We know what NATO peacekeepers are worldwide and what they do. They're not going to give up the lands that have been liberated, the people that have been liberated. So all of that. And it's a matter of Trump. He's speaking some of the truth finally. His people are speaking some of the truth about the situation. So that is promising. But if they have to finish it militarily, they will. And it will be just. Whichever way it is, it's going to be just and the killing will stop. But it will be, I feel, on Russia's terms. It has to be because their stance is righteous. And I would just share with your audience in our last few moments here that they do some research on President Putin because he is he's a genius. Look up the Valdai Club. The man can go 4 hours straight. His historical knowledge, talking about why people love him. You go to the Valdai Club, it's like 4 hours. And another thing, he takes reporters' questions for like 4 hours straight every year. Yeah, and not just reporters, but the people of Russia, and gets personally involved in solving the problems. That is the real definition of a leader. And frankly, Russia's, I believe, to be the hope of the world in terms of BRICS, in terms of the economy, in terms of cooperation among nations. And the United States would do well to become a part of that instead of against it. And also in our final moments together, I would like to share my website with your listeners. And it is AmericanOrthodoxChristian.com. I'm an Orthodox Christian, and I decided, in fact, as I told you, to begin sharing my knowledge as a historian again on these matters. But that's my personal website where I combine the geopolitical with the spiritual. I invite people there. You can also contact me through there. But just remember that Russia is not the aggressor in this, and the United States needs to recognize that. And I am encouraged to see the truth that Trump and his people are recognizing, although I believe he always knew it. But at least he's saying it publicly now.
Okay, all right. That sounds amazing. By the way, I would love to have you back on to dive into the religious aspect of this. We didn't get a chance to talk about that today because, honestly, I really do believe in the separation of church and state a little as well. So I didn't want to cloud today's discussion with talking about religion, but I really do want to have that conversation. And I want you to come back and share with us the Christian Orthodox perspective to things and how that plays into it, because I think that is a part of what's going on in Ukraine, the way Russia is. We don't really understand that. So we'll come back to that. Well, listen, this has been really enjoyable. Really appreciate you, dropping the knowledge bombs on us. And I will link everything in the show notes. And like I said, I would love to have you back on to then focus on the religious aspect of things and have you share that with us.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you, Ray.
All right. Sounds good, Christine. Stay on the line a minute. All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that and hope that contributes to your knowledge base on one of the topics that, again, it's in the mainstream. So let's see what happens. Let's see if the war ends. I think it will. And then that way we've only got one war left to talk about. All right, everybody. Talk to you soon.
This episode was brought to you by the new book, Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website.